Okay, we have another live session today, and today's topic is cloud computing. Cloud computing has really transformed many businesses, many industries. So today we want to really focus on the financial services industry, but lots of the learning points and discussion points will be relevant to any industry. And we will look at this modern multi-cloud environment. And to do this, I am very pleased to say I am joined today by two great experts on the topic. We've got Marc O'Regan, who is the Chief Technology Officer for EMEA at Dell Technologies. Hi, Marc.
Hi, Bernard. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, such a pleasure. And then we've got Bruno Domingues, who is the Chief Technology Officer worldwide for the financial services industry at Intel Corporation. Hi, Bruno.
Hi, Baron. Thanks for having me.
It's so nice to have you with us. Maybe you can give us a very brief overview of what you do in your day job, just to give us a bit of context. Marc, do you want to kick that off?
Sure. Thanks, Bernard. So I'm Chief Technology Officer for Dell Technologies for Europe, Middle East, and Africa. What does that mean? That means I have the pleasure at looking at, the situational analysis in terms of technology, where technology is in the industry today, and where it's headed in Horizon 2, Horizon 3 context. Horizon 2 being 3 to 5 years out, Horizon 3, 5 years and beyond. I spend most of my time these days in the emerging technology spaces. That takes in cloud, artificial intelligence, and functions of AI. It also takes in other emerging and new techs like 5G, edge and edge architecture, cloud native architecture, and data management.
Very good. Bruno, Marc, by the way, where are you joining us from today?
I'm joining you from Ireland.
Very good. Where about in Ireland?
Just about 40 kilometers south of Dublin in a place called Wicklow, Kilcroney in Wicklow.
Very good. Bruno, over to you. Tell us a little bit about what you do at Intel.
Yeah. So as a Chief Technology Officer for Intel, especially when you focus on any industry like financial service industry, I used to say that I manage the technology aspect, but it's from one side internally at Intel, and of course another side is externally. Internally, of course, it's make sure that it's whatever you're developing internally, features of your products or any development that you have on top of the software, we are always looking to what the financial service industry are looking for, what it's the capability they need it. So I am the internal voice for this development. And of course, as imagine a company that developed silicon or hardware like Intel, it's nothing if you do not have software that take advantage of this. So, and my outside job, it's also to make sure the ecosystem partner, every ISVs that you have specifically for financial service industry, take advantage of those capabilities that develop in the hardware, and of course, to bring it to the market. So I have the influence internally and until the point that the customer is using. So because it's when a customer use our technologies when really the innovations happen.
Very good. Where are you joining us from today?
I am talking from the beautiful Portland, Oregon, West Coast, United States.
Very good, very good. Anyone joining us live, feel free to let us know where you are watching us from. Always feel free to ask questions. If there's anything you're interested around cloud, especially in the financial services industry, just type away and we will try to answer as many of your questions as we can. So, Marc, let's kick this off. What would you see as some of the promises, the key promises of cloud in the financial services world?
Yeah, good way to start, Bernard. I think when we look at cloud and in the context of service delivery and what it was created and intended to do for all industries, really, we have to observe the core pillars and principles and standards around cloud. So when the National Institute of Standards and Technologies, for example, tell us that, we have about 5 characteristics. There's elasticity, extensibility, self-service, ubiquitous network access, and transparency of cost. And when we take those things into the FSI space and we look at it, we can see that by and large, that has fundamentally remained. Those core pillars and principles in terms of the promise of cloud are still in situ. I think there has been a huge perception shift in cloud, though. We have to remember that it's well over a decade ago when cloud was introduced into the enterprise, which is, of course, where many of the organizations who are interested in this conversation sit within that enterprise. So I think the promise of cloud really has maintained its value, which are rooted in those standards that the likes of the National Institute of Standards and Technology have set out for us. But cloud itself has changed dramatically over the last 10 to 12 years since being introduced to us through the enterprise. And also of note, I think we have to observe that the whole movement around the cloud first strategy, which we heard about predominantly at the beginning of the last decade, and that's an approach that has changed, I believe, as well. In my view, it's outdated. It's well over 12 years old now, and in my opinion, it's an approach that was deeply flawed from the outset. And this has been proven toward the end of the last decade, when we'd seen a lot of payloads and workloads in the financial industry and other industries move onto public cloud platforms and then go through a sequence of repatriation back down to on-prem for a number of different reasons. So like all tech movements, the perception has altered. They change quite quickly, but do so in order to align to the needs of the ecosystem and the users. Very good. Bruno, anything you would add to that?
Yeah, I like the point, and indeed, I think when of course the cloud computing started, you can maybe date this 15 years ago. The promise it was to be cheaper because you have the economic of scale. So you usually, for example, someone that have a major data center that can crunch a lot of servers inside that can offer cheaper services. However, we realized a few years later that it's not the promise, because of course we see many of our large customers that they said, wow, I can of course build an infrastructure and deliver the same services, when you're talking about infrastructure services, cheaper than the cloud service providers. However, I think that it's morphing what it was the promises. I see many of the financial institutions now adopting cloud computing, not because they know that it's cheaper. They are adopting for cost optimization. They would like to focus more on the application or the business side of the house. I mean, develop a line of business application and not be in the data center business. They don't want to manage the infrastructure. So shift to get more agility rather than cost saving. So, and of course, different customers, different size of the financial institutions, they have different perception. If you go to $1 trillion club, that it's those banks in that range, they have a completely different motivation to go rather than a super regional bank. So it's totally different. But I think that it's the initial promises and also how they have been adopted now.
Before we talk about some of the evolution of cloud in a bit more detail, maybe you can share with us what you see as some of the challenges, because in the financial services industry, there are many unique challenges around security, around regulation and others. So when it comes to cloud, Bruno, what are the key challenges that you are seeing or that your customers are talking about?
Yeah, cloud as a whole, it's the way that you execute your application, you deliver your services, especially when you're talking about everything because it have a digital channel. What is the major challenge that I see? It's that cloud has a promise to have this immutable infrastructure. I mean, you have the development team and they can deploy and orchestrate this application to the production. That's what we call DevOps. So best practice in development and best practice in operation, it's the same worldwide. So, and then, as you mentioned, for example, the aspect of security, even best practice in security, it's something that it doesn't change by the geography. For example, the way that you secure your password, the way that you generate random numbers is the same. So what they call now DevSecOps. However, financial institutions, they have a different challenge because cloud bring a homogeneous platform that you can execute your application. However, compliance is not. Compliance is really regional. So if you are a bank in, for example, United States, you have different regulators that you have to report. The same in EMEA. In EMEA, you have different. In Germany, they have on specific regulations. The same in UK. So now we are talking about DevSec compliance ops, and compliance is the tricky part because for each geography or each workload that you have, it's unique, it's different. So how you be agile, because cloud bring this homogeneous, immutable infrastructure, but how financial institutions can take advantage of this and at the same time be compliant, because each country, each jurisdiction, they have different regulations and the way that you report. What you can do, for example, in UK, probably you cannot do in Malaysia. So many of those banks, they have this global footprint. That is the major challenge they have.
Very good. Mark, anything to add?
Yeah, Bernard, I agree with a lot of what Bruno has talked to there. I think the evolution of cloud, as you've correctly framed it, is really interesting to observe. If we go back, only as far as 5 to 6 years ago, we really still saw cloud as this place, this public platform. It's so much more than that now. I think finance organizations and institutions all over the world are seeing these platforms come together as a collective service or digital modern digital model for financial services, built for service delivery that can scale, right? That can scale right across the continuum of public cloud platforms, core private and hybrid cloud platforms, and into, of course, what we're now calling edge cloud platforms. Mm-hmm. And these are the arenas where we see new business opportunities, which I'm sure that we'll talk about today. And then equipping ourselves for this becomes a little bit of a challenge. So get this idea of multi-cloud that's presenting itself into our ecosystem is really the idea of collectively taking these platforms and binding them together as one living, breathing digital ecosystem. Now, that's not an easy thing to do. It's a difficult thing to do. And there's a number of different, and it's all about the service. It's all about where we place the workload, where we place the payload, where the service needs to be in order for that service to maintain its level of integrity, and in order for us to be able to provide a service level and quality of service level to our users by architecting and building and platforming for right time services. So there's a number of different reasons, areas that we can look at that are going to present any bank, for example, a challenge. Bruno hit a lot of them there. There's compliance and compliance related things that we need to think about being pushed down by the regulator, the EBA. There's interoperability and support constraints that we need to think about. There's cost-related constraints, which we spoke about already as well. Is it cheaper to have and run this workload on-prem, or can I move this off-prem and get a better level of scale and drive innovation? There's latency to consider. If we're looking to get performance from a system and we need that system to be close to where the data is, can we afford to have a round trip to a public cloud platform in order for that to exist? And then probably the biggest one for banks today that I'm hearing is sovereignty and ownership and control of data. Very much as a technologist, I see a lot of banks, a lot of organizations, insurance companies as well, looking at how they can exploit the functions of cloud, public cloud platforms, and the underlay of private cloud platforms, and extend that capability to edge platforms today or into the future, but maintain control over their data. Have a level of innovation that is going to resonate for the organization, but without relinquishing control of the data. And this is really about understanding your data posture, where your data lies, and then being able to tap into the right resources, be it on-prem or off-prem, in order to exploit them positively for the organizations and the consumers of services.
Very good. So what you're saying is cloud is something very different to what it was in the past, that
Absolutely.
It is gone beyond this public platform. It is now, you now have lots of choices. You can have the same technology on your on-premise. You can have it in someone's data center. You can have a private cloud, a public cloud. So there's new hybrid cloud world. And then you have, I guess, lots of different cloud applications, different cloud providers, potentially, that all need to work with each other. Bruno, anything to add on this whole evolution of cloud?
Yeah, let me add an angle from the financial institutions, how they have been approached in the last few years, what have been changed when they're looking for the cloud. I think one aspect, it's the quality of how financial institutions they have been consuming public cloud. For example, 4 or 5 years ago, it was mostly infrastructure as a services. And nowadays, the last couple of years, they are saying, well, I see no value doing lift and shift, moving just infrastructure to the public cloud, because they realize that the technology that those public cloud service providers they have, a problem they have internally, and maybe as Marc mentioned, especially in financial services, they have the core system. And then it's like take a few systems just for infrastructure as a service, move out of this of on-premise is great, what we call it's against the gravity, because the data creates some gravity as well. Another aspect that I haven't seen also a lot of maturity for many of those financial institutions was, well, I would like to have, because regulators, they impose a lot of pressure as well. It's if I move to the public cloud and for some reason I have an issue, it can be not only because data center get out, but sometimes I have a problem with this specific vendor. I needed to provide a plan B. In many regulators, they ask financial institutions, if you have to provide that you have the capability to move workload out of this cloud SaaS provider in X amount of days. So put it back, the challenge for financial institutions, okay, what is the approach that I have to provide this capability? Can be like I develop an application that can run in any cloud SaaS provider, have this portability, or should I focus on execute very well in every single day in this cloud SaaS provider, of course, pay a high penalty in case that I have to migrate. So we haven't seen that it's actually most of those financial institutions, they decided to have a risk assessment approach. If you are going to adopt this specific cloud SaaS provider, they of course make an assessment. If I needed to migrate, I really have, how much it cost me and how long it take. And of course, it's like define a book, what it's regulated workload, what is not regulated workload, what is the cost, and what is of course the trade-offs. And then I think that it was most part of the maturity that happened the last few years. It was consuming things that it's of course up to the stack, platforms as a services, software as a services, and have more a risk approach with those public cloud.
Very good, very good. In a minute, I want to look at some of your favorite use cases and explore some examples of how hybrid cloud has really made a difference. Before we do this, I just want to say hello to a few people. We have people from all over the world joining us here today on YouTube. We have Jawad from Pakistan saying hello. We have Stano from Slovakia. We have Pram from New York City. We have Papa from Senegal in Africa. Eric from Kenya. We've got someone from India. We have Aruna from Sydney. We have Mohammed from Oman. And we've got someone from Saudi Arabia joining us, from Nigeria. So it's great to have a truly global audience. As I said, if you have any specific questions, just drop them in and we'll try to tackle those. Going back to Marc then, what would you say are some of your favorite use cases that really demonstrate the value of hybrid cloud and that has really made a difference to some of your customers?
Yeah, that's a great one. There's so many but I think my favorite and probably the one that resonates most with banks, particularly in Europe, and potentially as well in the MERET region, in Middle East and Africa also, is how we handle PSD2. So, some of the things that are coming down, like I mentioned earlier on, from the European Banking Commission and other, personally speaking with a lot of banks right across the regions, right across Europe, we've seen how, we've seen them struggle on how to handle PSD2. It was coming down 2016. How do we handle this in a meaningful way that allows us to bring the platform into the bank and then scale that platform, but on our terms? Build a capability under our firewalls, for example, and later extend this service onto a public cloud platform of our choice. So I think the important thing here is that the use case that I'm describing here is, obviously it's a payments platform that's being rolled down by the Commission. The banks are under pressure to actually build this capability and port that onto a public cloud platform. If we can bring this in under the firewalls, build the capability, as I say, on the terms of what it is that the banks are trying to achieve, and then extend that out while maintaining control by leaving the controller on-prem. This is a really, really good example of how we're exploiting the functions of public cloud and the platform of public cloud in a positive way, in order to build and comply with what the regulators and what the Commission is looking for us to build, but also have a level of control and scope over this new digital service, which of course ends up being obviously a component of the digital strategy of the overall bank. So the infrastructure and platform is essentially a cloud service that's now built, I guess, on-prem, but delivered off-prem. And this is hybrid cloud at its best, where it becomes a potential bedrock as we build this capability for all digital services that we want to provide and scale across all towers of the bank.
Very good. Bruno, what are some of your favorite use cases?
Yeah, I have a couple of use cases. One, it's more butter and bread. It's that we have seen, for example, especially in US, in EMEA, that those banks, they have this environment for risk calculation. When you say risk calculation, they need, of course, grid computing to be compliant with the stress test, derivative pricing, or banks that they have operation, the security, for example, they have a risk checker. They have this broad spectrum of calculations, what at least risk analysis, what some banks would call now risk as a services. So they have thousands of problems, and they have a cluster of machines that historically they used to execute those workloads. And of course, it's like a lightweight environment, because sometimes you take this cluster and execute one simulation, and the next day you go and execute another calculation, and then it's how it works. So I'm seeing that it's many financial institutions that are taking approach like we have peaks and valleys, the way that use this environment. And some of those large banks that we have, for example, in the US, they have 5,000, 7,000 machines in that environment. So they can, of course, move some of this workload to the public cloud. Those workloads that it's not IP sensitive or the data is not sensitive, they can just execute on the public cloud one they are using there on-prem. So it's a way they can optimize, of course, the allocation of the workload. But I think the use case that I think it's most innovative with the hybrid cloud, it's, for example, a couple of years ago, I was working with financial institutions in Europe, and we are comparing how, for example, Bank of America, they use Erica. Erica, it's the chatbot. So if you call Bank of America, they say, would like to speak in English or Spanish. So it's a robot. So I'm talking with a robot. So, and imagine going to the Europe, a bank that have presence in Europe, they have to develop the same technology for 16 different languages. So it's a lot more complex to do this. So what I'm seeing that it's, for example, to develop this kind of technology, speech to text in different languages, something pretty expensive. You need skills, you need, of course, data. We need to invest some money, of course, to keep that. When you go to the public cloud, you can just consume as API. So you go to cognitive services and plug speech to text, NLP, natural language process, and then you connect it to your own premises. Because at the end of the day, your request, I would like to see what it's my checking account. So you go to the public cloud, they convert speech to text, do the NLP, understand the context, and give you the what is your checking account, what you would like, because the products and services internally. So I see those kinds of good examples of the only hybrid cloud can deliver. Optimize your cost structure, and of course deliver some innovations that otherwise you'd be prohibitive expensive.
Yeah, if I can complement that, Bernard, because Bruno got a couple of use cases there and I only got one in. So, so to balance it out, I think I as a technologist, I'm really, really interested in all of emerging technologies conspiring together in order to, create this idea of capability in banking and in insurance. And what I've observed is this movement whereby, when we look at some of the real concerns and opportunities that banks and insurance companies, that all organizations within FSI are looking at. Some of them are looking at fintechs and challenger banks and what they're doing, and whether how we handle this. Do we bring them in? Do we acquire them into the organization, or do we build a capability in the organization whereby we go and compete with them? And I think it's really about understanding what is it that we have that the fintechs don't have, and if we bring that capability into the organization, either by acquisition or by building that capability, then could this actually amount to something that that can really mount a challenge and even extend beyond what the fintechs and challengers are doing? And when we start this conversation, it begins and ends with the data. It's understanding where the data is, how we get to the data, how we actually surface the data, and make that and present that data to data scientists who can then use their skills in order to correlate that data with incoming data from outside of the banking arena. So, data from the outside world. So if you could imagine going into databases, data repositories, data engines within a financial services ecosystem, and bringing that data up onto a platform and across a network, while correlating near real-time data that's coming in off mobile phones, that's coming in from from platforms such as Twitter and LinkedIn and other platforms potentially, and then correlating that data, integrating it through potentially a piece of middleware, and presenting it up into the CI/CD pipelines of our developers. We're now enabling our developers to get good, clean information based on the questions that you're interested in answering. Is there a demographic that I can approach now to open up a new business channel? If so, can I use the data in my data repositories and in my databases to merge with sentiment data that we're bringing in off all of these platforms? And the point I'm really making here is, if we have an understanding of our posture in terms of our data and data accessibility, if we have an understanding of the relationships between our development teams and our operations teams, if we know how far up the abstraction layer we need to go from a cloud perspective, do we get, as Bruno said, up above the infrastructure layer, up into nearly functions layer, where we can act and react to what it is that we need to do to be nimble enough to create new services, then understanding these areas are extraordinarily important. And I'll leave it at this. When we do that, and when we look at the core technology pillars that we're interested in from an emerging tech perspective, what we've just approached there is artificial intelligence, edge computing, cybersecurity, cloud native and edge native architectures and capabilities. The whole gambit is in there, and we put ourselves in an extraordinarily powerful position to be able to compete into the future.
Yeah, this for me is one of the biggest benefits of cloud, that you have access to all these APIs that enable you to just run AI. They allow you to enable you to run blockchain, all the key technologies and emerging technologies that you can then use. Absolutely. So we've talked about the benefit of cloud and some great use cases, but what are some of the considerations that firms need to make when they are thinking about moving to the cloud or thinking about the right hybrid cloud environment. Have you got any best practice tips to share, Marc?
Yeah, there's a few. Governance, compliance, control, policy knitted into the fabric of the service delivery model, which is now your cloud platform. Absolutely essential. If you start to look at excurting onto public cloud platforms that you've not excurted onto before, and you do so without that level of compliance and control and policy knitted into, the event, you put yourself at risk. If you look to exploit the functions of artificial intelligence out at edge by looking at social media platforms or ATM machines, for example, and try to stream data in off these and correlate that data in order to answer a problem that we haven't been able to solve or create an opportunity that we see. This is a really, really powerful capability that we build. But as we excurt out to the edge, we present ourselves with a new attack surface. So we need to be very, very cognizant of this as we start to explore and exploit emerging technologies. I also think understanding our data posture in terms of its cost. If we do not understand a workload, and I've seen this so many times, and we lift this workload and put it onto a public cloud platform, and it's very data centric in the sense that it scales exponentially or can scale exponentially, we can get ourselves into a lot of trouble, a lot of hurt very, very quickly. And then we're into a conversation about, okay, how do we take this workload or payload down from this public cloud platform? How do we re-platform for this? It becomes extraordinarily expensive. I've seen scale go from, anywhere between 8 and a factor of 18 more times cost prohibitive to do this. And without public cloud bashing, because I really want to make this clear, we at Dell Technologies, Microsoft and Amazon are huge business partners of ours. Our technology helped erect a lot of the hyperscaler technology platforms. We still do a lot of great work in those spaces today. We're very, supportive of the right workload going on to public cloud platforms, but we're very, very focused on what we call application appropriation. So getting that right and making sure that we have that right mindset before we, put a workload on-prem that should go off-prem or vice versa. We get that right, because when we get it wrong, it can go so wrong. And this idea of multi-cloud, you mentioned APIs, Bernard, I agree with you. We're starting to scale further and further up that, what we call the abstraction layer, further and further away from the infrastructure up into that ephemeral layer, because it gives us the freedom to be able to move. And as we look at things like API as a service, where we're just going out, consuming the API in the marketplace and then just letting go of it, and it becomes a cost event. This is really, really exciting for us, but again, it's about understanding our capability and understanding the governance of doing that.
Very good. Bruno, what would be your best practice tips and key considerations for anyone moving to this multi-cloud environment?
Let's put it in a way that it's lesson learned in the previous 6 to 8 years in this time frame. I think that as I have been following several of those largest banks moving to the public cloud, and I remember in 2014, 13, 15, that most of those, it was have a big motivation. They start with the financial statement. It was, I'm going to move to the cloud because I am assuming that in 5 years, that's the status that I'm going to have. So you start doing some financial engineering, because let me step back and explain how it works with the public cloud. You can go pay as you go. Of course, you're going to pay a lot more. Or you can have a long-term commitment. You set with your cloud SaaS provider, okay, I am committing myself or my company to consume this amount of compute resources in the first year, in the second year, third year, and then you go. And then most of those financial institutions at the beginning, they are looking, okay, I'm going to depreciate, for example, the servers that I have in my data center like in 20%. So I take this workload and I put it in the public cloud. So they are making this kind of a calculation, assuming that it's just lift and shift. So what happening, of course, it's most of the workload is not that easy to move. At the end of the day, they are committing to consume something in the public cloud and was not able to migrate, and then you are paid double. So, and of course, in many situations as well, I have seen more than once, you move to the public cloud and then they move and realize, oops, I moved 500 physical servers, the equivalent to the public cloud, and I realize that it's more expensive than I have internally. Because in your data center, you have the sunk cost. I mean, I'm now running my data center less efficiently and then pay double when you go to the public cloud. So I think if you go to looking for financial statement and say, I'm going to save and I'm going to have this linear migration to the public cloud, is not going to happen. Because at the beginning, you can move big chunks of workload, but at some point you get the saturation zone that it's really harder to move only when you transform the application. And I haven't seen financial institutions paying sometimes 5 times what they used to have on premises, because the cost of the ingress, egress, that is another thing that it's sometimes is hidden in the process, because every read and write that you do in the public cloud, you are paying. Internally, you are not aware because the infrastructure is already paid. But when you go to the public cloud, you have to look for this. So I think that it's one specific consideration, it's the cost. I think that it's another consideration as well. It's, as I already mentioned, it's the risk assessment of this migration. It was, if I'm looking for agility, of course, there are some platforms that you can use in the cloud. It's not the whole cloud is the same. For example, I have seen some financial institutions that they would like to be very agile when they're looking, for example, for personal finance application, because something that you would like to have features added all the time, you would like to be very up to date, and then they go to function as a service. This is one type of workload that you consume in the public cloud. It's not regulated. You can be very productive. You can have hundreds of the updates in the application a day. But if you go the same with a regulated application, you are developing a language that only your cloud service provider understand. You cannot just take the application, migrate on-premise, and move to a different cloud service provider. So the quality of how to use the public cloud, it's also something that you have to take in consideration. So again, the first, I think that it's do not motivate yourself to go to the public cloud for any financial statement. And another thing, it's the devil lives in details. You have to choose very well what kind of workload you're going to move and how you're going to architect this in the public cloud.
Very good. You've touched on some mistakes there already. So we all know that some cloud implementations have gone wrong. You've been in the industry, both of you, a long time, that you've seen failure, and I think it's always a good starting point to look at mistakes and examples of where things have gone wrong, and then take some of the learnings from this. So do you have any good examples, Marc, where you feel actually this really demonstrates how companies can get it wrong and what we can take away from that?
Yep. I think you're right. I think we peppered the whole conversation with, the notion that we do need to be careful. I think this is a hugely positive movement that we've been in for the last 12, 13 years. The direction of travel is cloud native, and we have to reframe and reset our perception of what cloud is. Cloud is not a public platform. It is an operating service delivery platform that scales, on-prem to off-prem and potentially out to edge. Where I've seen it going wrong, let's start with the provision of cloud and cloud services itself. When these were built, it was being very, very widely and publicly touted that data center is dead, long live data center. It was moved to the public cloud or you will all, crash and burn. And so there was a race to the public cloud. And as Bruno has rightly called out, a lot of applications that never belonged there ended up, experiencing either degradation in performance, degradation in service levels, critical cost issues that needed to be, critically approached in order to fix very, very quickly. I motioned toward one of them, which was a massive, huge supply chain partner of Dell Technologies a number of years ago. And, when you think about supply chain, you think about the kind of company that we are, you can imagine how big this organization is. They put a critical workload into public cloud, and it did not work out. It scaled exponentially across this particular public cloud, and we had to figure a way of getting it out. So it took time, it took resources, and it took a lot of expense, because once the realization dawned, it was at least 3, if not 4 to 5 months before we could actually move that, that platform back down to where it actually did belong. So that's one example of where cloud can go wrong and did go wrong. And I think that cloud first motion and that declaration that data center is dead drove a lot of this behavior through CIOs and CEOs right across all industries. And what we've, of course, seen very, very soon after this, in the middle of the last decade, is a huge investment in on-premise capabilities from all of those providers. We've seen Google with Anthos, we've seen Microsoft with Azure and Azure Stack, and, we see Amazon AWS with Outpost. So I think understanding the posture is extraordinarily important, and I think we've made that. I think we've made that point. I also think cloud can go wrong for organizations if they do not have control over their data. The data, make no mistake about it. We talk about this being the data era. I believe this is the data decade. I believe this is actually the information era, and having control over wielding an innovation engine that works, that can extract information from data and will allow you to build a data set that is going to give you a competitive edge, is critical over the next 10 to 15 years. So maintaining that control over your data while exploiting the functions like I mentioned earlier is a really, really important thing to do. And we see this right across FSI. This is something that all banks, all insurance companies are thinking and talking about now, that capability. Relinquishing the data means you're relinquishing your chance and opportunity to innovate. So I think that they will be my mistakes.
Very good. Bruno, do you have any examples of where cloud went wrong and some of the learnings that people can take away from that?
Yeah, I think that I have some. For example, of course, when you mention go wrong, it can be really wrong, or at least something which wasn't as expected. So I think that what happened most often the last few years, it was they planned to go to the public cloud, and they made all the planning. As Mark mentioned, for example, this statement like cloud first is establishes as a policy and move to the public cloud, and then they realize that's a lot more expensive, or that it's no value to the business at some point, because you collect or harvest some benefit, but that after that point you're not collecting nothing, you're just burning money. So I think that it's from the project perspective, I think most of those financial institutions, they learn, as I mentioned, for example, do not start by the financial statement. And I think that the second one, it's not specific for the cloud. It's just because cloud, like any other technology, they have a different way to approach. We have seen the past couple of years, for example, financial institutions, not only financial institutions, many other industry. We have heard, for example, in US, for example, the problem that happened with Home Depot and many other companies that have data leaked, of course. I think that it's the major issue. What happened in it's a different way to manage that environment. We're seeing increasing threats when you're looking for cybersecurity, and at the same time, when you're looking for the public cloud, it's like, well, we have this shared model. So the cloud service provider manages this for me, and I have to manage this top. So sometimes it's looks like easy, but for many of those organizations, it's a completely different infrastructure. It's not like, for example, you have been dealing with your on-premise environment for the last 30 years. You know pretty well what the problems are. When you move to a different platform that you have to learn and you have to train your people to manage that environment, it's a lot harder. What is the boundary? What they have to manage? And then I think that it's what you haven't seen some of those issues when it goes wrong. But luckily, financial institutions is probably one of the most conservative industry, so they always take baby steps and always have several backup plans so when things goes wrong.
There's
Very
another
sorry.
example. Sorry, Bernard. I thought I'd just balance it a bit by looking at other examples where banks have built and started to build a cloud capability by looking at private cloud and building a private cloud technology stack without thinking about some of the things that Bruno had spoken about there. So to continually keep saying it's a problem with public all of the time will be disingenuous of us to the conversation. I think we also have to look at as we move to build private cloud and hybrid cloud platforms, there's a people and process and a cultural aspect to this and how this should work, but there's also a technology piece around this as well. So if we're going to build this platform, what are we going to do? Well, we're going to take applications, and we're going to take potentially future cloud native applications, and we're going to port them onto this platform. We're going to take processes and processes, run them through this platform, and deliver services in a digital format. That means defining all of the data center elements into software. That's the underlay. That's the M&O stack, and then we go further up the stack, and we look at the different functions up at that stack. There's your platform. What a lot of banks and institutions, really then start to think about is, well, if I take this beautiful, shiny new platform and I drop this into my ecosystem, surely everybody will come. And that's not always the case. What we need to make sure is that we have the platform instilled with all of the pillars and principles I mentioned earlier: governance, compliance, controls, policies, knitted into that platform, knitted into the services that we're delivering on that platform, that we have an operating model in behind the platform, and that we have an enterprise architecture aligned to that platform as well. In other words, that the operators are now cloud governors and are responsible for the integrity of the services that they're providing and the platforms that they're providing to the developer community. So there needs to be a thread between the developer community and the operators. And we've seen this movement a number of years ago, where we've insourced a lot of our developer capability back into banks, for instance. So when a developer is looking to innovate, is looking to write better software or new applications, they're going to depend on the platforms and their tools and how that all hangs together and works. And that needs to be thought about from a developer perspective. And the operators need to have the tools, the understanding, the know-how, and the confidence to be able to build a platform, scale the platform, man the platform, and govern the platform, just as Bruno aligned there. When we look at VMware, we get in behind VMware. We have VMDK as a file format in behind VMware. We have AMI and its associated APIs up on AWS, and we have VHDX in underneath Azure. They're completely different operating systems. So these things need to be thought through also. And then finally, and I'll leave it at this because it really, really, really is important from a cultural perspective, giving the governors of cloud services the support and the training and closing the skills gaps, if we identify any, is extraordinarily important. And that really is incumbent on leadership to be able to provide that. So there's a big, big cultural element to this, while also making sure that the technical integrity is there also.
Very good. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think that the technology sometimes is the easy part. It's actually getting the skills and culture right is the hard bit. Now let's look into the future and explore some of the predictions for cloud, especially in the financial services industry. If you put your futurist hat on, Bruno, and you say, okay, what do you see in the future? What's on the horizon? What are you excited about? What do you predict is going to happen? What are some of the things you would talk about here?
Yeah, it's a really good question, especially when you're talking about a regulated industry. I usually to use my crystal ball looking for two major angles in financial service industry. Of course, one is development platform, because at the end of the day, cloud is just where you execute your application. So the first one, it's the trends that you're seeing development. Another one, it's the business practice slash regulation. So those in combination, because of course regulation it was how you operate your business as a financial institution. So what I have been seeing from development perspective, it's a lot more fragmentation and the way that you develop and consume. That's the whole what we can call by different names, but everything as a service. When we're talking about, for example, microservice, it means I develop a function and I can consume other functions. So in this world, we see that it's supply chain. You be a major driver. You have a saying, for example, February this year, for example, MIS, Monetary Authority of Singapore, they issued a specific regulation about you financial institutions. You are responsible for your supply chain. It means if you are consuming, for example, services that a third party is offering you, you are responsible. We have seen this happening, for example, attacks in the supply chain with solar wind. It's another example. So regulators, they are aware about this, and they know that it's, of course, as much companies start to move to this architecture and have more concentration, the cloud SaaS provider have a concentration of the risk. So I think that this is one aspect of the movement. And another aspect of when you're looking for the future is most of financial institutions nowadays, the largest one, they have a single digit application that it's cloud native. So looking for the next 10 years, that's the major challenge that they have. It's how they are going to refactor those applications. Of course, some applications are going to retire, some applications, they are going to develop new ones. We know that it's the next 4 years, you're going to develop the whole world. There are some numbers. We will have 500 million new applications, more that we developed in the previous 40 years. So there is a huge pressure to deliver digital services in this space. So if I take this practice with development capability and what it's the bank already have, I am assuming that it's the near future or for a long foreseeable future, we see that it's the end game will be like a hybrid for most of those financial institutions. Will not be all public. Also, you are now seeing some of those banks that they adopted cloud for a long time, 4 or 5 years ago, that start this movement. They're reaching that point at the saturation zone. We saw this is with tablets, with phones. Cloud probably will be you have the same pattern. And another thing when you're looking for this as well, the end game will probably be a hybrid environment. And you be a lot more focused on confidential computing. That's something that we didn't mention here, but it's something that it's growing so fast. It's as far as I'm looking for the supply chain, I'm looking for provide privacy for the data that I'm running in a third-party data center. Of course, regulators starting as they are now. How you protect the data at rest? How do you protect the data at movement? PCI DSS, it's all about this. They dictate what it's the encryption keys that you are using. But now it's with confidential computing, how you're protected the data in use. So I think that it's the next major breakthrough. It's a confidential computing or cloud confidential computing.
Very good, very exciting. Mark, what do you see coming up in the future? What are some of your predictions of future development in the cloud, especially in the financial services industry?
If there, I would be, my point of view would be very close to that.
Looks like we've
I
got
think
some connection
technology
issues
swing.
there with Mark. Okay. Let's see if you
Can you guys hear me?
can get Mark back. Okay, you're back now, I think.
I'm back.
No, there's a delay at the moment. So As always, anyone who wants to rewatch any of these conversations, you can head to my YouTube channel where you can find lots of conversations. That was fascinating. So many amazing insights from Marc and Bruno on cloud, hybrid cloud in the financial services industry. Thank you so much, Marc. Thank you so much, Bruno. There we go. Marc is back. I was just saying thank you so much for your contributions, but maybe we can quickly now spend a bit of time looking at what you see as some of your main predictions.
Yeah, okay. I'm sorry about that. I got kicked off the network, I think. I think every 15 to 20 years, we experience a shift from centralized to decentralized. We're very much in that decentralized world. So I think what we're seeing moving into the future is a movement whereby, FSI organizations are going to have to start getting comfortable with the chaos. I think Bruno is absolutely correct. We live in a highly regulated world, and FSI, we have to move within the guardrails of, compliance and regulation. But we also have a responsibility to our banks or our insurance organizations to build our KPIs and our goals and align technology to those KPIs and goals in order to reach and exceed them. I think when we look at technology to do that, I think we need to think through how we bring and land emerging technologies into our ecosystem, but to do so in an appropriate way, and not to look, exclusively at artificial intelligence and treat artificial intelligence as one pillar in and of itself. I think when we look at bringing artificial intelligence in, we have to look at how it might behave. And I really like the way Bruno described that there around the movement of data. What are we going to do with artificial intelligence? Where are we going to land that within the organization? And what, learning models are we going to apply, for example? And I think from a future perspective, it's really, really exciting to see some, new emergence within that AI space. So when we look at the algorithms, I think we're coming off the tail end of what we call wave 2 of artificial intelligence, which is well over 60 years old. And we're entering into a third wave of artificial intelligence. And it's bringing a number of exciting changes in algorithms, changes in architectures and engineering to support those architectures. Things like neuromorphic architecture and things like, even outside of AI, things like quantum computing and where that's going to bring us. And the whole thing about cryptocurrency, of course, is exciting. So I see banks, insurance companies looking at cloud native. I do believe cloud native is the direction of travel. Bruno talked about microservices. We could look at microservices and other things within the cloud and edge native world to solve a lot of problems, not just create opportunities for us, but to solve a lot of problems. We've been living with mainframe for decades and decades. We could potentially look at microservices and thread microservices to mainframe and then cut away the dependency of a mainframe and architect our way out of a problem. This could be a direction of travel for the bank where you're actually architecting your way into a full cloud native world without throwing the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak. That's just an option, I guess. But I do see cloud native and going further up that stack and building that functions, definitely PaaS, but up even into the functions layer, building that capability into the bank is going to be an important thing to do, because it will allow us to, when we think of cloud native applications, they're ephemeral enough to land out into these edge environments, and they're nimble enough to be able to react and to what's going on beneath us and around us. So I think definitely from a cloud perspective, cloud native is definitely the way we are thinking. I think it is definitely the data decade when we need to get a handle on our data, when we need to look at, analyzing a data as it comes in through the ecosystem, normalizing that data, aggregating the data, doing some sort of level of analysis on the data, and then moving that data across the financial ecosystem not just across the banking or the core banking network, but across the financial ecosystem, getting out into supply chain, hooking into supply chain, and so on and so forth. Understanding, getting sentiment data coursed through that network. It really is about, moving out of the concept of the data center and into a centers of data kind of an ecosystem. And that for me is definitely the future. That will bring in artificial intelligence and its functions and data science and things of that nature, but will also bring with it cloud, which will be that new infrastructure. And 5G, which we haven't even mentioned today. We've mentioned a little bit around about security and cybersecurity, which will, of course, be that new digital fabric. But then, 5G being that digital fabric and bringing, cybersecurity potentially even through AI into that. So it's extraordinarily exciting. But I think, again, I'll leave it on this. Making sure we understand our posture in data and that we knit governance, compliance, control, and policy into the service delivery of each and every service that we port onto our digital service model. It's extraordinarily important.
Very good. Thank you so much, Marc. Thank you, Bruno. This was fascinating. Great insights. Thank you for sharing all your knowledge. Anyone listening, let us know what you think, what you've learned, what your key takeaways were. And I will see you again shortly. As I said, anyone wants to rewatch any of this, head to my YouTube channel where you can find this conversation and many others. Thank you, Marc, and thank you, Bruno.
Thanks, Bernard.
Thank you. Bye now.